All right, so Tabletop Adventures, part 4, the notes. Looking decisively rough here for some reason. I have no idea why. Anyway, um, yeah, I just wanted to break down two major parts of the video that I'm going to be shooting about Tabletop Adventures, trying to explain what a tabletop adventure is, but I can't do it without once again revisiting board games and role playing games because those are the other two types of games that a tabletop adventure is trying to both borrow from its best aspects, but also trying to stay away from its worst aspects. So it will be a dualistic video of, on the one hand, a comparison once again with board games and role playing games in 10 steps. And in the second part, an actual breakaway from board games and role playing games by saying not so much what it is, but what it isn't, if that makes sense. Or maybe what it isn't. Um, yeah, what it basically isn't as compared to a board game or a role playing game, but what it is in the unique sense of the way. Because one of the strongest aspects, and it is one of these 10 aspects that a tabletop adventure is it is designed from the ground up without falling into the paradigms of board game design and role playing game design. It follows its own path using elements from those two. So, anyway, first part, comparing it to board games and role playing games in 10 steps. First, experience. The board game experience focuses on feeling smart by mastering puzzles, winning from others or from the game. Role playing games focus on telling an emergent story with full autonomy and authorship. So you have that mastery and you have the autonomy of board games and role playing games. Tabletop adventures, whether it's my own tabletop adventure, Traumaflut, still have to get used to the name of it, Traumaflut, TAS, or any other tabletop adventure. Tabletop adventures generally focus on the immersion, immersing yourself in exploring a world and discovering new things. This is going to come back later in what tabletop adventures are. It also harkens back to the very first two videos that I made in this series. Second of all, tools. Board games work with a closed set of rules and components from a box that establishes a gameplay framework. Role-playing games frame character creation with rule books and worlds with lore books. So players and GM have a base to play on. Now that base is very important because the base implies growth from. So you have rules enough to establish your character and you have rules enough to establish the world or describe the world. That is your base, and you start from that. And while board games, they have a box, and everything is in that box. Rules, components, gameplay, everything. Tabletop adventures, however, approach tools from an object-oriented standpoint. And if you're a programmer or a developer like I used to be, then that makes sense. Object-oriented, as in you have various parts. In this case, you have booklets that establish characters, events, locations. In my example of Drummer Flute, it would be Gazetteers and Atomic Adventures. But you also have tabletop props, things to decorate on your table to fully immerse yourself in, visual elements, and other mood elements, music, drinks. If you're playing a pirate game, drink some rum to go along with it. You can even do some cosplay, dress up a little bit, whatever gets you into the mood to create an atmosphere. That's the second part. Third part, mechanics. Board games are mechanics first. Let's face it, balanced and fixed. Role-playing games, however, use a mechanics arbiter who decides their impact and to what extent they actually use mechanics, because it's themed first. Tabletop adventures are mechanics light. They're very elegant in their concept because you don't want to be bogged down by understanding and affecting rules in your game. They should just be there as a counterpart, again, that dualism, a symbiosis of the story. So you have story and you have mechanics, and they interweave with each other in a way that feeds upon each other and feeds you your interactivity and your prompts back to you, so you can act upon them and act upon the world as the world impacts upon you. Talking about story, that's the fourth point, story. Board games have fixed narrative, if any story at all, with the story being very much on rails. Once you've done the story, you're finished. Role-playing games have bespoke adventures or custom-made propriety adventures made by the GM or DM or whoever the arbiter is, with lots of room to deviate. So whenever the players, in their exercise of full autonomy and authorship, decide to not follow the story anymore and go off on their own, the arbiter of the rules needs to accommodate that, and that becomes the new story. So emergent story is everything. Tabletop Adventures, they have short narrative prompts in both plotted adventures, those atomic adventures, for instance, in Drama Flute, and freeform format, but always symbiotically tied to the mechanics. So again, there is an emphasis on story, but the story is functional. And in order for a story not to become too on rails, and also because, and this will come later back as one of the story points, one of the aspect points of Tabletop Adventures, why stories are not like long form narrative and like novellas almost, is because we don't want to create a choose your own adventure, and we don't want to become bogged down by the process of writing a story if you eventually as a player are not going to be following that story. And also the community is going to play a big part in this, and you don't want to bog the community down with saying like, well, you got to write like 10,000 words for an adventure. So short narrative prompts, but always functional. Social aspect, number 5. Board games and role-playing games are multiplayer first, always have been. Solo second, if there's a design for solo at all. A lot of the problems and issues and even social stigma of playing solo comes from the fact that games, by their very nature around the table, tabletop games are social constructs. You bring together your friends and family and you play a game. Admittedly, that's the biggest fun that you can have around a tabletop. But when you play solo, the experience is different. It's more distilled. It has a different focus, equally fun, but definitely not social. So Tabletop Adventures, as opposed to board games and role-playing games, are individual first designed. They're not designed for a group, assuming that you're always going to be playing with friends. They are individually player first designed, with the ability to expand to multiplayer. So you can play in a group, but they're always, the design of any TA, of any Tabletop Adventures, like Drum or Flute, starts with the individual. 6, the gameplay itself. Board games use turns, rounds in a strict format between players. Role-playing games have free range between players and arbiter, the GM. So board games, on the one hand, have a very strict framework, a scaffolding that you follow, which makes it very intuitive to play a board game, unless there's like a lot of rules and a lot of turns and phases and steps and whatever not. But generally speaking, it's there. Whereas role-playing game has no framework. It just says like, well, each player has their turn, and then the GM sort of flows willy-nilly in there. It's more of a free range kind of aspect of gameplay. Now, the Tabletop Adventure, the TA, uses a character and a world dualistic turn structure. Dualism is very heavy in TA. That will come back at the end as well, as what a TA is really. But Tabletop Adventure has a character phase and a world phase. Let's see, and I think actually that will play into, it will also play into like the point of view of how you play, but I don't think I actually have this in here, but it should be. Progress. Board games use meta currencies or just regular currencies to measure success, victory points, etc., using components, because it's very tactile, to gauge how many victory points they have, and if whether or not they reach the goal, or whether or not player A wins over player B, or against the game. Role-playing games, however, use some meta currency, more often than not, in the form of experience points, because you want to grow your character. There's also gold for gear and equipment, etc., and services, and maybe even fate points, some meta currency to sort of game the game, to produce re-rolls in exceptional situations or whatever not. TAs, Tabletop Adventures, don't measure success. This is a very important point. They don't measure success because you're not playing to win. Technically, you're not playing to win in a role-playing game either, but because the focus is so character-based, you need some form of measurement towards growth in your character. Now, the characters, and once again, I don't have it in here as a point, but characters are not as important in Tabletop Adventures as they are in role-playing games. And I'll come a little bit to that a little bit later. But Tabletop Adventures don't measure success, but they track time and energy for the sake of intuitive play. When you're playing your character, you will have a board in front of you with actions, and those actions, they cost energy, and you will track them with cubes. It's a little cube economy thing that you're playing. The reason why it's in there is to give you a routine kind of framework, as we said in gameplay, to sort of have you intuitively go through the steps and always remember what you need to do next, so you're not sitting like a solo RPG, for instance, staring at a blank piece of paper thinking, okay, how do I start this solo RPG thing? Or how do I play? A tabletop adventure has a very clear set of steps. It has that character phase and the world phase, but it also has, during your character phase, you tracking energy on your board and taking actions. And when all the energy is done, your day is over. That is tracking time. And in a day, you have a character phase and the world phase. The world phase takes place. Certain things in the world shift, and then the end of the day is there, and you start a new day. It's very formulaic. It's very intuitive. That's what we're going for. Okay, 8. We're almost there. Learning curve. Board games often have introductory missions or plays, or otherwise just a rule book with examples. Everyone can relate to that. RPGs sometimes have abbreviated lists on character creation or specific book layouts to clarify reading. There's a lot that can be said about that. I won't go into it right now, but rules have to be learned in one way or another, and board games and role-playing games have found various ways of doing that. Tabletop Adventures core tenets, which I'll come to in a minute, embrace intuitive and cinematic play. It's one of the tenets of Tabletop Adventures. Excuse me. So rules are minimal to enhance the immersion. Remember, immersion is one of the big aspects of Tabletop Adventures. Rules are minimal and enjoy a ludonarrative connection. So that is that connection between mechanics and story. This hopefully brings the learning curve down and allows you to play very quickly and get immersed immediately into your adventure. 9, table presence. Board games look good on tables, often taking up a lot of space while being more functional than aesthetic, depending on if you have a Euro game or an adventure game. Role-playing games sometimes have tactical maps, terrains, and minis, but not necessary. Otherwise, they just minimize table presence with a theater of the mind, talking, building stories, having a good time, rolling some dice. You don't need a lot of space for that. Tabletop Adventures use table presence to maximize the effect of transporting the players into the scene, so that immersion once again comes up. Number 10, community, finally. Community, the board games enjoy both industry, a heavy industry factor, and gamer communities with some hobbying in miniatures, terrain building, that kind of stuff, and tabletop enhancement, aka blinging out your game. Role-playing games focus on independent creators more often than not. There's some industry leaders, obviously, Wizards of the Coast, for instance, Games Workshop. Although Games Workshop, is that a role-playing game company? No, not really, actually. But there's hobbyist communities. The hobbyist community in our role-playing games is quite large, with a smaller industry presence, like I said. Tabletop Adventures, because it's a new system, obviously hasn't any communities yet, but the intention is to feed Tabletop Adventures with strong hobbyist participation. Okay, so I'll get into that now as well, because that's the big part one, is comparing to existing board games and role-playing games as classes of games. The class of Tabletop Adventure, besides bringing adventure to a tabletop, again, the dualism, adventure is, as I showed in a graphic, going on a journey, meeting challenges, and creating discoveries, having discoveries. Both negative and positive forms of those three can come into play when having a tabletop adventure or having an adventure in general. And the idea is to bring that down to a tabletop, keep it analog, not make a video game out of it. It's also not LARPing. It's not running through a forest. That would have maximum immersion, by the way, but you're doing it on a tabletop. So those three aspects categorize adventure. Now, what makes truly a tabletop adventure unique that has no relationship further to board games or role-playing games? The immersion, yes. The connectedness to the world, connecting to your imaginary world that you have in front of you that consists of some booklets that have the world described to you. The core set will have a little core country or land that you start in with your character, choosing one out of 3 or 4 different locations that you begin with, comes coupled with a starting adventure that you can go on to. Now, you don't have to do any of it. It's all up to you. Autonomy and by the way, mastery, the two traits of board games and role-playing games, still have a part in tabletop adventures. But the key part is immersion, is getting yourself immersed into the adventure. But the learning curve needs to be intuitive. So the system should be elegant as not to overwhelm you with a lot of rules, to get you to play as quickly as possible. There's some theater of the mind, but the visual props on the table should help. Music in the background, drinks on the table, basically getting you into the adventure. And there will be some solo journaling, obviously. I've also discussed this previously. There will be some writing of a narrative, but it will be short form, no long paragraphs. You don't want to be bogged down by writing a lot, just a single sentence. A creation of a key. We're calling them keys and locks right now. Thank you to Heath for that. But these are words. You write down a key, and that key is generated because you just had some kind of event take place. You've undertaken some action, whether it's a impactful decision or not. But you create a key, and that key can unlock future locks. Yes. So by keeping not only the rules, but the story, both story creation and story reading, as light as possible, you get into the cinematic mode of playing. That is a big part of this tabletop adventuring. The immersiveness we also call cinematic. So it is elegant, it is short, visual, cinematic, and it is modular. The modularity of a tabletop adventure comes by having a close-knit community come around your world. My world is Drummer Flute, which is mythological and folklore based, cozy but with an edge. And anyone who wants to come in and play in that world can, and preferably create gazetteers and atomic adventures. And the idea is to keep that format so succinct, so small, that it doesn't take a lot of effort to essentially GM them, to write out your adventure or write the lore of your new piece of location or territory around the core that I will create, but to write your specific area. So if you want to adopt a pirate culture or a Norse culture or a Greek culture or an African culture, great. Write a gazetteer. It can. I'll produce templates that will essentially have prompts that you can fill out and flesh out. And it really shouldn't take that much, because you're writing single sentences where narrative is needed. You're creating an interlocking structure of characters, events, and locations that make sense for your area. And if it's an adventure, it makes sense for the story. So gazetteers are location-based, atomic adventures are event-based, they're stories, and the characters you can also create in gazetteers and atomic adventures alike. These are the NPCs that you basically encounter. So a lot to take in, but that's the gist of it. You have in the upcoming DM Masterclass a part about um, it's escaping me now again. You have a part about board games and role-playing games that where the comparisons start, and that is sort of as a big farewell wave to board games and role-playing games, saying like, I've had a great time, but you had some flaws, and that's why Tabletop Adventures exists. And then the second part, that is Tabletop Adventures and the general gist of the idea. Finally, as a footnote, I will not be discussing Jordan Flute just yet because I'm still working on that, but I'm trying to grasp as a category of games what tabletop adventures should be, with, of course, the caveat that just like board games and role-playing games, you can have so many different interpretations of that game that a definition really is worthless in the end. But hopefully I've created some space for people to develop a new type of adventuring that both borrows from board games and role-playing games, yet also creates something completely new and exciting that focuses on immersion rather than mastery or autonomy. See you next time, and hopefully I'll look a whole lot better. Ciao.